Hello and welcome to the Missouri Association for College Admission Counseling Virtual College Fair panels. I'm so excited that you're with us tonight for the panel Applying to Highly Selective Colleges. We are very excited you're taking the time to learn more about this wonderful topic. Just a few housekeeping reminders as we get started. Your camera and your microphone are off, so the panelists cannot see or hear you. If you do have questions during the panel session, you can use the Q&A button to type your questions to our presenters at any time. In a few weeks, we are going to be having some Missouri Association for College Admission Counseling Virtual College Fair 6x6 Virtual College Fair events. We're very excited for that schedule. So keep an eye on the same website where you register for this panel for those signups. This session and all sessions, these panels, and the future college Fair 6x6 sessions are all recorded, and they will be posted at the same website where you register, strivescan.com/Missouri. I'm really excited to turn it over to our panel moderator tonight. Allison Marborough will be our host and help us enjoy and learn this evening. So Allison, take it away.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Jennifer. My name is Allison Mulbrough. I'm one of the college counselors at Villa Duchesne in Oak Hill School in St. Louis, Missouri. I've worked in admissions and college counseling for a total of 18 years, and I have to say this is a fantastic opportunity for students, parents, even counselors just to learn more about highly selective college admissions. So I am joined here on this panel by three fantastic, experienced, and extremely knowledgeable college admissions officers. I'm going to start first by having Marissa from Colorado College introduce herself.
Hi, friends. Thanks so much for joining this evening. We are excited to talk to you about the world of highly selective admission. As Allison had mentioned, I'm from Colorado College, which is in Colorado. No surprise there. More specifically, Colorado Springs. So about an hour south of Denver, which is our state capital. We are a liberal arts and sciences institution. We have about 2,200 students that reside at CC. So a little bit of a smaller type of institution. But I think the most unique part about Colorado College is our block plan schedule. So students only take one class at a time. And yes, you heard that right, one class. So one class or one block is equal to 3.5 weeks. It's Monday through Friday, so 5 days a week and for 3 hours each day, 9 to 12. So if you are an intro to biology, you are a biologist for 3.5 weeks, right? And so it's nice being on the block schedule. Your professor's only teaching your class. You're only taking that one class. So a lot of field study opportunities are available for our students to get outside of those four walls and be able to network and get their hands, dirty in the field study world. So if you want more information, let me know. I'll drop my email in the chat later on, but I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Calvin at Johns Hopkins.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? My name is Calvin Wise. I serve as a director of recruitment at Johns Hopkins University. Just finished up my 10th year here at Hopkins in Baltimore. Johns Hopkins University, so we're a private research institution located in Baltimore. We're in the city, about 3 miles from downtown, very residential campus. Hopkins is known for research. We're the first research institution established in the United States, and we've led the nation in research spending for almost 40 years. So hands-on learning is key to the experience, as well as our position in Baltimore. So there's a lot to do in the area and for you to get involved. So it's a little bit about Hopkins. I'm excited to chat about selective admissions in a little bit. Before that, I'm gonna turn it over to Victor to allow him to introduce himself.
Thanks, Calvin. Hi, everyone. My name is Victor Thomas. I'm on the admission team at Washington University in St. Louis. I am a graduate of WashU as well. That's not always the case when you speak to admission representatives, but I did enjoy my time at WashU. And WashU, I think what I want to share really briefly is we are really known for our incredibly flexible academic environment and very interdisciplinary academic environment. We have 5 what we call divisions. You can think of these as colleges or schools under the umbrella of the university. And while you'll earn your major from one, you'll earn your degree and your primary major from one of these divisions, whether that's arts and sciences, engineering, business, art, or architecture. What's really valued by our students is that they can take classes outside of that division and even earn second majors outside of that division. So it is absolutely possible and very much encouraged to double major across divisions. Perhaps you are a student studying computer science in the McKelvey School of Engineering, but also want to earn a second major in marketing in the Olin Business School, or simply just take coursework in communication design in the Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts. So if you are the type of person who has multiple interests, diverging interests, WashU is a great place to consider. Back to Allison.
All right, thank you, Victor, Calvin, and Marissa. As I said, I can't imagine a better panel for this evening. I think we're gonna get some really great discussion topics here. We're gonna hear opinions and viewpoints that I think are gonna be really informative for our prospective students and their families. Just a reminder, if you're a participant, you can go ahead and type any questions you may have in the Q&A section, but we are prepared with some questions that we think are really going to get discussion going and probably answer a lot of the questions you may already be thinking about. So kind of just as an introduction, because this is a selective college admissions panel, I think we need to define the term selective admissions. Victor, I'm going to ask you to do that. And frankly, even beyond selective admissions, looking at these three institutions that are represented here, I would call this highly selective admissions. So kind of with that qualifier, how would you define selective or highly selective admissions?
Sure, happy to start off with this, Allison. So I think one way to kind of very clearly and concretely define selective or highly selective admission is to simply look at the admission rates, right? This is something that is very easy now to just type into a Google search bar, name of a college, admission rate, and it will probably just spit out what last year's admission rate was at that college. I think that generally there are different kind of measures of this, but generally schools that have an admission rate of 25% or less are categorized as selective, and highly selective would be even more or even lower than that as far as the admission rate. I think what's important to understand about highly selective institutions, though, is that while our admission rates are low, it does not mean that those were the only 15% of applicants who were qualified, right? I think that Marissa, Calvin, and I all see a majority of our applications, of our applicants, as qualified academically. I would venture to say as many as 90% of the applicants to WashU in any given year demonstrate through their transcript and otherwise that they are prepared to engage with the academic rigor at WashU. Unfortunately, we don't have space for all of those students, right? And so we'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but what highly selective and selective schools will do is look beyond just that academic qualification. They will look at you as an entire person. And sometimes this is referred to as holistic review. We'll look at what you're interested in outside the classroom, what you are doing in your community, and how you're sharing your story with us. So that's how I would define selective admission. Allison.
Thank you, Victor. I think it is useful to have a little bit of those numbers as context. I know occasionally when I'm talking with students and we're looking at a school that maybe has, I'm going to say for a round number, a 10% admit rate, which would be certainly considered highly selective. The family's mind instantly goes to, but wait, that means 90% are not admitted. And while that is true, I want families to understand that if this is a school that is really of interest to you, that, as Victor already commented, majority of the students interested in these schools are highly qualified. If you don't apply, you have a 0% of being admitted. So if this is a school that seems like a fit for you, one that you are very much interested in, and if you are, prepared to jump into that selective college admissions pool, that's certainly something that shouldn't really scare a student away as they're making a choice. But Victor brought up an excellent point in that it's not just a numbers game here. These students are really being looked at in a very holistic manner. And Marissa, I'm wondering if you can define what is holistic admissions for us, because I feel like that's a term that's said by many people, but I don't know that it's always really explained.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty popular phrase in the world of higher education is this term holistic review. And I simply break it down to students as the whole application, right? We're looking at everything, right? What isn't taken into consideration in a holistic review? So I'll talk about the different, I guess, categories we would look at in a holistic review process, and maybe within those sort of emphasizing, the different aspects we may look at in the transcript, essays, and things like that. So number one, I always say, transcript. What have you been doing for 4 years inside of the classroom, right? Within the transcript, we're looking at a couple of things, and it could be different, I should mention, for a Johns Hopkins or for a WashU than a Colorado college, but generally you'll find most of these things are going to be applicable to the highly selective colleges. So grade trend, right? We recognize that sometimes students experience dips in grades or ebbs and flows in grades. I like to add a point to that too. If that is you and you experience that, put that in the additional information section, right? We don't want to be making assumptions on your application about why you experience those dips in grades. So providing a little bit more context for us in the additional information section is going to be huge. I would say rigor. If your school offers rigorous courses, are you taking advantage of those, but also performing well, right? You could be taking 12 APs and failing them. That's certainly not what we're looking for. But, striking a good balance between the rigorous schedule that your school may offer and performing well in that as well. Next to that, I would say academic core classes, right? Weightlifting and basket weaving are cool, but we want to make sure you're taking English, math, natural science, social science, and foreign language. So that would be generally what we're looking for on the transcript side of things. Your school will accompany a school profile with that as well, right? So if you're thinking my school doesn't have any rigorous courses, right, or I'm limited in those options, we'll be able to see that on the school profile, and we'll read within your school's context, right? So more of an individualized way of being able to review an application through a holistic review. So a benefit to that as well. Testing, right? Most schools, I would say, are test optional, right? If COVID had a silver lining, I would say that most schools going test optional would be one of those. Colorado College is one of those. Johns Hopkins, WashU, thumbs up. Yes, also test optional. Amazing. I know there is a lot of ambiguity surrounding the test optional policy. I don't submit a test score, but student B does. Do they get in over me? I just want to totally emphasize that there is no negative impact on your application if you choose not to submit a test score. A lot of the highly selective colleges will list averages for middle 50% on the ACT and SAT. I usually advise students to let that serve as a frame or a guide to you if you're choosing to maybe submit your test scores or omit those. Maybe review those middle 50% to say, should I submit or should I go ahead and leave those off the testing report? So that's testing. There are a couple of other options as well. Test blind, test required, but test optional, I would say, is by and far the largest population of our colleges and universities, what they're requiring these days. ECAs or extracurricular activities, what are you doing outside of the classroom, right? And this can really show us how you're going to add to our community in a lot of ways, what takes up your time. It doesn't necessarily need to be, captain of the soccer team or president of the Key Club. While those things are important and you should list them if you have those, but maybe you babysit when you get home. I have 7 brothers and sisters, right? I babysat when I got home. Maybe you have household responsibilities, you work a part-time job, you volunteer. So everything that consumes your time outside of academics, making sure you're listing that on the ECA list as well. Letters of recommendation. Some have requirements 1, 2, or 3. This helps us to know what are you like inside of the classroom, right? Are you elevating classroom conversation? Are you intellectually curious? Are you turning in homework assignments on time, right? All of the great things that we want to know. Since you're coming to an academically rigorous environment, we want to make sure that you've performed and added to the conversation within the classroom at your current high school. And then essays or writing in general, right? The Common App, Coalition, QuestBridge, all those wonderful applications will have you sort of pick a topic, write about it. Hopefully you'll complete that, send it to the English professor to be able to look over your grammatical, and structural changes. But we're really looking for the content, right? While structure is definitely important, you shouldn't neglect that. We're looking for what you're writing about. And so what I say with the essays is write a couple of drafts. That's always important. You may think that essay A is a really great option, but then your English teacher or math teacher reads it and they say, I actually like essay C. And this provides more context to who you are as a student. I found this to be more beneficial. So writing multiple drafts. Some colleges will have a supplemental portion, which I'm sure we'll talk about later on in the presentation when it comes to fit and standing out in the process. But supplements are basically showing interest in the college. And my one quick piece of advice for that is do your research. We can tell when you've copy and pasted WashU supplement into CC supplement, especially when you leave the word WashU written in there, right? So making sure you're looking over those essays, but being intentional about what you're writing about as well. And being authentically you. Some students get really wrapped up in, oh, I just want to write about what the admission officer is going to want me to write about. And that's not what we're looking for, right? We want you to be authentic, be you, and write something that you're passionate about, because that sets our souls on fire as well when you're excited about something. So hopefully that answers anything. Calvin or Victor, if you have anything to add, feel free to add.
Okay, thank you, Marissa. That was a really nice overview of what holistic admissions is. It is, as she pointed out, the whole application. Now, whenever we're discussing those pieces and those parts that comprise a whole application, a question I often hear is, well, is one part more important than the others? So Calvin, I'm wondering if you can kind of highlight for us, is there a rank order of what's most important to least important? How do you guys navigate your way through all those different pieces?
That's a really good question. And Marissa and Victor alluded to this earlier. As I think about most important, the first thing that we're thinking about is academic preparation, right? And so first and foremost, we want to ensure that all the students that we admit can do the work and are going to be successful in the classroom. But as Victor mentioned, the vast majority of students that are applying to our institutions, kind of meet that watermark. They are able to get over that hurdle and they have the academic preparation. So when I think about outside of that, what's most important, and I think students oftentimes think of the application as the individual parts, but we think about the application as a collective and what are we learning about the student in totality? And so it's hard to say what one piece is going to be most important, but what I will say, and I know we'll talk about kind of the committee process in a second, but when we're having conversations, again, a lot of students are competitive. Who's compelling in our process and where are we spending most of our time having conversations about the most compelling students? It's really about their story and how we're thinking about them as a member of our learning community. What type of classmate, what type of roommate, what type of clubmate, what type of person bumping into on the pathway are they going to be? How are they going to engage and empower with each other on our campus? That's where we spend probably 90% of our conversation. And so what that looks like on your side, it really is, and what's most important is how are you telling your story and how are you articulating that you're a match or a fit for that institution? And that might come out in the essays, that may come out in the letter of recommendation, that may come out in the supplemental essay, right? For institutions that have supplemental essays, usually those questions are very specific to that institution. And it's getting at that match piece, right? It's we're asking you, why us? How are you going to be additive to our learning community? And that's a really great opportunity for you to articulate why you feel like you're going to be a good addition to the campus community. So I don't think you should think about just one piece for you to hone in on. I think you want to step back and think, out of all the pieces in my application, maybe on the front end, I always encourage students on the front end to think about how am I going to tell my story through the pieces of the application and what I'm going to emphasize where. But when it's all said and done before you hit submit, you want to think, is my story being told? Is it coming through clear? And some of the most compelling students, they do kind of have this common thread throughout the application that we have a really good sense of who they are and how they're going to contribute to our campus. So that's your goal. That's your mission. That's what you're trying to achieve.
And if I may jump in really quickly, something that I didn't mention earlier in responding to kind of a definition of selective admission is that we do not have a formula for admission, right? That I think is really important and builds off of Calvin's, the question that Calvin responded to in terms of, is something more important than the others? Well, yeah, I think academics is probably most important, but it's not formulaically kind of weighted in some way to assure a particular outcome. I think that that's another characteristic of selective admission, is that the outcomes are unpredictable, even for us. And I think that that is important to recognize.
Thank you, Calvin, and thank you, Victor, for using that word unpredictable, because I think that often is one of the most useful terms that I discuss with students when they're building their college list. We want you to be ambitious with your college list. If it's appropriate, we want you to have highly selective colleges on your list, but we have to think of those as unpredictable. There is no clear test score, there is no clear GPA that is going to get you in to these types of institutions. They're looking at many different things. Something that I do want to define for our participants is the idea of supplemental essays versus the Common App or a more general essay. So just to make sure everyone understands, I think all of your institutions utilize the Common Application as well as maybe the Coalition or other kind of group applications that are accepted by hundreds of colleges and universities across the world, really. Your essay that you put into that general Common App or Coalition section, that is an essay that is going to be read by every single college to which you submit your application. But then there are sometimes, not always, there are supplemental questions that are specific to that institution. So that is a time when you do want to be specific, but at the same time, never copy and paste, because that really can work against you in the process. Just to show of hands from our panelists, do you all have supplemental questions? Yep, that's a thumbs up nod. I thought so. You will find supplemental questions more frequently, I think, with the more highly selective colleges and universities. So that is something that I often counsel students, is that you need to be prepared for that and you need to spend time. Those supplemental essays can be very important in the process because they are specifically asking what that university wants to hear. Versus your Common Application or your general college essay, that's telling your story to everyone who's going to read your application. So just wanted to designate those different types of essays or writing samples because it can be a lot to keep track of for students who are navigating this college admissions process. Okay, so Calvin made a nice reference to, us in our committee, we spend our time talking about, the fit and who this person is in totality. So I think we need to take a moment to discuss the committee process. Marissa, could you talk about why it is important to have multiple voices at the table when making an admission decision? I'll often say to students, do you really know who's going to be reading your application? It could be a wide variety of people. So I wonder if you can weigh in on that. What is the committee process about?
Yeah, and that statement definitely holds true, especially within our office. I think your application will have a minimum of 3 eyes on your application. So it's not just the territory representative who's overseeing, that specific state that's going to be reading your application. Largely, it's going to be a couple folks in that office who are going to be seeing your application, reading through your course materials. But the committee process, right? Like, think if you've seen the movie Admission with Tina Fey and Paul Rudd, where they're sitting around in a round table and discussing files, that is quite literally, or at least how we do it. And Johns Hopkins and WashU, feel free to jump in as well. But that's how we read applications, where your file will be up on a projector and we're all discussing your actual file. And, myself, if I was in charge of your application, right, I would be presenting. I usually get about 2 or 3 minutes to be able to go through your case, hit some highlights, why you would be a great addition to our institution. And then we all come to a vote. So it's quite literally just like the movie, but I think it happens in an interesting point in the application process where we've read through all the applications. We have a really strong group of students that, Calvin had alluded to earlier. We're like, we know that they're academically prepared, but now let's go through the community out of it, right? And let's parse through what we need. A colleague a couple of years ago framed it really nicely and we're trying to build an orchestra, right? It would be a really boring class if we had 500 violinists or 500 cellists, right? We want to have 50 cellists and 50 violinists, or forgive me, I'm not into music, but 10 flute folks, right? Like we were trying to build an orchestra here, or what we call at admission, molding and shaping a class, right? We want to make sure that we hit on diversity, and that can mean a few different things, right? Geographic, racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, right? And so in the committee process, that's also where that comes to light as well. In addition to all those wonderful holistic ads in the process, we're also trying to fill institutional priorities as well, and making sure that we're building a very inclusive, diverse class to come into our institution. So, but also for committee, it's to check biases as well, right? And have different perspectives in the room, since we all come from different backgrounds in the admission world. And we've not just worked in higher ed, but different fields of education as well. And so it's always nice to hear different perspectives and check each other on our biases throughout the process as well.
That the point about biases, I think, Marissa, is wonderful, because I will have students who will ask me, hey, I'm a member of Young Republicans, or hey, I'm a member of Young Democrats, or, you know, a type of club that maybe indicates a political or religious view that they have, and they're nervous. Should I put that on my application? So Marissa, should they put that on their application?
I always tell students, if that is true to who you are, put it on the application, right? We don't want you to hide your identity or who you are as an individual. I kind of referencing back to sort of being you and being authentic, right? We want you to have your true self on campus. And so if you're having to hide things in the application process because you think that's going to appeal to us more, then you arrive to campus, like you feel like you have to hide parts of yourself. And so I always tell students throughout the admission process, please add everything on your application, even if you would deem it as, oh, maybe they're not going to be as partial to the Young Republicans or the Young Democrats or things like that. Don't let, political stance and things like that deter you from adding that to your application. Because again, as I just mentioned, right, checking biases within the room happens throughout the application process. One quick thing I wanted to mention is that at Colorado College in specific, we actually team-based read. So we have 2 readers at once reading every single file. And so that's also really nice that at the initial start of your application, we're already checking those biases with one another instead of more of an individualized reading session as well. Not every school does that. It's actually pretty unique. There's only a few schools that actually take part in that team-based reading process, but just I wanted to shed light on that. That's a possibility as well through the reading process.
Can I add something really quickly too, Allison? I also sometimes get the question of, if I submit my application earlier, will that confer some sort of advantage? And I hope that Marissa's explanation of the committee process really reveals the fact that no, right? Like, yes, we might be starting to review some of your applications as they come in, but the vast majority of the ones that we are going to consider, we're going to be bringing to committee. So there's not necessarily an advantage at highly selective institutions in submitting your application earlier, other than you might get it done earlier, which might feel really nice during a busy senior year. I do want to mention that that is quite specific to selective institutions, and that as you are working with your counselors to build a kind of a broad and deep list of different selectivities of schools to apply to, there may be some schools that do have some sort of advantage that's conferred if you submit your application early, but not at selective institutions.
Excellent point. Thank you so much, Victor, for adding to that. It's true. You see a wide variety of opinions and thoughts and backgrounds in these committee processes. So, we want students to be their authentic selves and just know that, yes, any particular opinions or, standpoints that they may share in their application, as long as it's genuine and authentic to who they are. I will tell a student, would you want to go to a college that wouldn't admit you because of that? No, of course not. If that's something that's really true to who you are and your beliefs, and a school wouldn't admit you because you were a member of this particular club, then I think, that school is not the right fit for you. So hopefully that lays any fears in that way to rest. So something that was brought up a bit about test optional admissions is the fact that our entire world has been dealing with a pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected so many aspects of student experiences, collegiate experiences, and also the admissions process. So it has triggered many students to have to interact with colleges virtually on webinars such as this, instead of maybe visiting campuses in person or interviewing in person with an admissions representative. Instead, much of this has pivoted indeed to online experiences. So Victor, talking specifically, Victor, about selective college admissions, how do you think the COVID-19 pandemic has affected the admissions process?
Yeah, so I'll start by building off of what you began to talk about, Allison, which is I think that the first place that you'll experience this changing is how you are seeking out information about colleges and learning about colleges, right? I think that the pandemic necessitated some forms of recruitment, such as webinars, that maybe didn't exist as much before, but that will continue going forward. Like WashU never had a recorded information session or a virtual Zoom information session until the pandemic, but we had to start offering them, and I believe, will continue to offer them because we've actually identified, colleges have identified that it is allowing us to connect with students who otherwise might not have ever had the opportunity to visit campus, or whom we might not have been able to reach in our own travel and recruitment efforts once that starts up again. Another kind of, I think, proliferation that I've seen in COVID times is how colleges are engaging students over social media platforms. So I highly encourage, we have, I think many institutions have had to become more creative with how they deliver information over social media platforms, from Instagram to TikTok. And I think that students are finding those to be really authentic ways to engage oftentimes with students at that school specifically. The other kind of major shift, right, with the pandemic relates to testing. It's been brought up a few times. Many selective institutions used to require either the SAT or the ACT. And the vast majority of all colleges last year did eliminate that requirement because we legitimately saw that students were not able to access testing sittings. And to Marissa's point, there is no negative impact if you do not submit testing. I think that this has, for colleges, kind of shifted their applicant pool a little bit, right? And has resulted in, at least at WashU last year, was just a slightly less predictable kind of in enrollment. Last year, we did our best to kind of understand, okay, if we offer this many students admission, this many we think will come. Colleges have to do this, right? It's really important that colleges meet their enrollment targets and don't exceed them too much, because there are a finite number of beds in dorm rooms. And so that is what Calvin and Marissa and I and our teams have to manage. But last year, things were so different because of the test optional landscape. And so that, I think, will continue to have ripple effects in subsequent years, and in terms of how we are, as admission offices, becoming more sophisticated with understanding, kind of the probabilities that students will choose to enroll if offered admission. Not that that's something I should mention, not that that's something that highly selective institutions really care about on an individual granular level, right? I want to connect this to another hot topic in highly selective admissions, which is that of demonstrating interest, right? There is this idea that if I log on to X number of webinars and visit campus and connect with my admission rep, it is going to confer some sort of edge advantage for me in the application process. And that really isn't true. The vast majority actually of selective institutions are not considering demonstrated interest in the ways that students might kind of think that they are. But at a macro level, we do need to make sure that we are reaching our targets and not over enrolling too much. So Allison, I don't know if that response completely answered the question. I think that it answered it, but there are still some unknowns, right? And I think that is the biggest takeaway that I can provide about the pandemic, is that there's just a lot that's unknown.
Thank you, Victor. And, I know I'm kind of jumping over to Calvin here kind of quickly, but Calvin, for students coming from Missouri, your campus may be the furthest away, if I'm including, families from Kansas City who are a little bit closer to Colorado. So Calvin, did you guys really experience any of that unpredictability because you couldn't see who had visited campus or that wasn't an option? Do you guys use demonstrated interest as something in your committee process? I'm sorry to just throw this at you, but just thinking about distance for our Missouri families, visiting your school via Zoom might be the easiest option for them. And I guess what I'm asking is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. So we don't track demonstrated interest at Hopkins. We did see, as Victor mentioned, probably because of test optional and how that changed students' perceptions about our institutions, as well as probably some silver linings with the virtual piece that Victor was talking about, the opportunity to gain more exposure. Students applying from schools that we had never received applications from, admitted students from, as well as there's a lot, when I first started admissions, when we built our models, it was off of like 10-year tables, 10-year data, and then it was like 5-year data. And now we're just going year to year, and things are so unpredictable. So I don't think, not necessarily as a result of how we are modeling around demonstrated interest or kind of factors that are known, but just generally we're in a space of a lot of unpredictability as we are moving forward.
Thank you, Calvin. I appreciate that. So thinking about when a student applies and just kind of giving them advice about what can make them stand out. We've already heard you say that most of the students who apply academically meet the bar, right? So they're capable of doing the work at your institution. So Marissa, could you talk a little bit about what advice you would have for a student who might be thinking, okay, yeah, I'm a good student, but how am I going to stand out in this very competitive pool?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think when I am advising students, I always say, if it's optional, do it anyway. Because that way you can go in with the headspace of, I've put my best foot forward. I've done everything I could in the application process to be shown in the best light, right? And show every part about myself and how I can add to the community, so on and so forth. So there are a number of ways that you can do that. So some supplemental things are like interviewing. I know we just talked about demonstrated interest and how some folks don't track that, but at a place like Colorado College, interviewing is a huge part of the application process, where you can chat with a current student at CC or someone that reads applications like myself or an alum of the college. And that's pretty common, but most colleges are like, oh, that is, optional. It's not required. So it is optional at CC, but we're transparent in saying, if you want to have a better odd in the pool or stand out in the process, doing an interview can definitely be sort of that shining light or that gold star on the application, if you will. So doing that, there is the video option. I know some colleges with COVID have shifted to more of a virtual model. And so if interviewing wasn't an option, they can do a video because slots fill up very quickly, where they just do like a 2-minute video about some topic that the college posted. I know the previous institution I worked for had like 4 prompts to choose from. You only need to choose one. It's a quick 2-minute video. And it, again, is just showing more context into your life that maybe your essay wouldn't provide, or your extracurriculars weren't going to shine light on, your letters of rec. It's just getting to paint a fuller picture of who you are. So we have as much detail as possible when going through the process. I would say also, it's cliche, but like staying in contact with the territory rep who's like going to be reading your application. Like I always value that through the application process, because as we talked about the committee process, right? If I'm going to advocate for you and I have that relationship with you already in some form of contact, it just aids in the committee process of saying like, I've stayed in contact, I know this about them, and it's just going to add beneficially to the application. So those are a few ways. The supplements as well. I know we touched on that earlier in the presentation, but right, being intentional in your supplements. Some colleges will say it's optional, but as I just said, right, do it anyway. Showing that interest in that college to say, I want to work with this professor. I want to do this study abroad opportunity. I want to be in this club or organization, instead of making it more generalized. That can really also stand out in the process as well.
Thank you, Marissa. All right, Calvin, I'm wondering if you can outline something that was briefly mentioned, and that's something called like institutional priorities, or maybe let me be more broad. Are there things in the selective admissions process that students have no control over, less control over? This is a stressful time for students applying to college, and I, as a counselor, want to make sure they are focusing on the things that they can indeed control. But I do want them to be aware that there are some other factors at play here that may indeed be outside of their control. Calvin, could you take us through maybe just some examples of those?
Yeah, you bring up a great point, and I want to kind of elevate one of the things that you said is that students should be focusing on what they can control, and there's a lot in this process that they can control, and leaning into those things, how doing your research and articulating your fit and writing those essays and there's a lot of things that students can control, where they're applying, when they're applying, but there are things that are outside of their control. And that's just the reality of it, right? And you have to keep in mind that we are dealing with very specific enrollment targets. At Hopkins, we aim to enroll 1,300 students each year, and there's a lot that goes into getting to that number. And so, as well as, we're building a learning community of different types of students, as Marissa mentioned earlier. And so I like the way Victor put it. I don't think that some of these things that we were considering are outside of your control has as much of an impact on an individual level, or we don't think about them in that way. But in the aggregate, as we think about our incoming class, we have to be cognizant of that, right? One obvious one, you don't control how many students apply, right? At a certain point, this process is a math equation, and we only have so many spaces. You don't control how many students we admit either, and that may range from year to year and where we are in the process. And so some years we might admit a little bit more. Yes, we need to get to 1,300, but we may admit a little bit more to get to that. We may admit a little bit less to get to that. As well as, I'm always interested when we're going through the committee process to get a feel and a sense of the class. How is it shaping up? What's the personality? And sometimes we get to a point in the process where we're like, we need more students like this, or from here, or we need more activists, or we feel like students in this area is what we're looking for. And so within that, or maybe there's programs that are more underrepresented on our campus, or there's just a more of an emphasis on a particular area. There's a lot of things that oftentimes shift from year to year. Sometimes they shift as we're going through the process, as we learn more about the pool, and there may be a little bit more of an emphasis as we're evaluating students. So all those things are really outside of your control. I think it's okay to be aware of those things, but also keeping in mind that you can't control that. That's why you apply to a solid list of schools that are around across the realm of selectivity. The last thing I will say, they brought up a good point about the decisions not being predictable, but they're not also random. Leacoff and the dean at Dartmouth said that once, and I thought that was key. And also, we're all schools out there, the vast majority of the schools are not as selective as we are. The average admissions rate at colleges is 66%. We happen to fall into that very small group of schools that admit less than 25. So there are a lot of great options out there, in addition to the selective institutions you're interested in.
Wow, Calvin, what an excellent point. And that is so, so true. The vast majority of universities and colleges out there admit the majority of their applicants. And that is something we want students to remember. As we're about to wrap up, I just want to make a quick kind of point when we're thinking about things you can control and things you can't control. In this process, there are actually 3 decisions that are made. And the students, you control 2 of them. You control 2 of the 3. You decide where to apply. If you look at Washington University and Colorado College and Johns Hopkins and you think, no, these aren't the right schools for me, don't apply. That is your choice. It is your decision about where to apply. The second decision are the different decisions that colleges and universities are going to make around the country. But then students, you get to make the third and by far the most important decision, which is which college are you going to grace with your presence for those 4 years? I tell you what, this whole thing gets flipped at the end, and it is the admissions offices that are nervous from April to May. It is them who are biting their nails and are they coming? And I love the student in committee and are they going to pick us? So students, we understand this is an extremely stressful time. I encourage you to take a breath and remember, you actually have a lot more control over this process than it may feel like in the moment. So Jennifer, I'll turn it back over to you to wrap us up.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Allison, Calvin, Victor, and Marissa for sharing such wonderful information tonight. And I hope that everyone who watched, whether it's live or the recording, has some new perspectives and tips to take with them into the application process. You really heard from some wonderful pros tonight. And I also hope it shows you that college admissions staff are here to be a resource, to answer questions, to reach out and build those relationships. And so I hope that you will take advantage of that throughout your college search process. All right, well, as we close tonight, I just wanted to let you all know that when you close your window, there's going to be a very quick 5-question survey, and we would appreciate any feedback that you have to provide for us. And don't forget to check back at strivescan.com/Missouri in a couple weeks' time for the virtual College Fair 6x6 programs, where you will get to learn about many great colleges and universities, both in the US and internationally. Also, you'll be able to find this session's recording, all of the panels, and all of those College Fair 6x6 recordings at that same website where you sign up. So you'll be able to watch back, pick up some extra tips, or share different colleges with family and friends as you explore all of these virtual options. Thank you again, everyone, for being here. Have a wonderful night and best wishes in your college search and decision journey. Good night, everyone.